So tonight, John 18, which, I don't know. I don't know that a lot of sermons when people preach a message from the Gospel of John, I don't think I've ever heard a message on just John 18 before. I'm sure some of our friends and the Calvary Chapel people are really good about going through verse by verse. So I'm sure they do it at some point. But it's just man, this is a hard chapter. But this is here, and it's here for a reason, and it's partly here to wreck us, I think. And so we're going to just dive into it. So last week we listened to the longest prayer, I think, and feel free to challenge me and if I'm wrong on this. I think the longest prayer of Jesus in the New Testament, and just powerful. Jesus is quite aware of what's coming, as we'll soon find out, and just to reflect. And John 17 is one of those that you can just go back to. It's just such a deep well. You can go back to and reread it and reread it and reread it throughout the year, and it just never reached the bottom of Jesus's love, his compassion, his just tender shepherd heart for us. For us, it's just amazing. And so John 18 begins, when Jesus had spoken these words, he went out with his disciples across the brook of Kidron, where there was a garden, which he and his disciples entered. And so this is, again, we're imagining the scene. It's evening, it's getting late. They've just had the Passover feast. Now they've left that upper room, that house that they were staying in. They've been walking through the city. And, because it's Passover, we know, there was a big full moon in the sky, so that's that full moon. There's no light pollution back then. And so you can really see the sky and the stars and all of this. And now they've, in my imagination at this point, they've kind of reached the edge of the city, and now they're crossing out to this garden that is there at the Mount of Olives. And it seems to be the way it's described here, because it's a place that they go into and out of, and the language that's used there kind of describes it as it's sort of like a walled garden, or it's a little bit of a private place. Maybe it was owned by somebody that had some connection to either Jesus himself or one of the disciples, that they had permission to go in and use this space as a place for prayer, just to be in the Lord's presence. And this was a thing apparently that they did a lot, that John tells us. Because we see in verse 2, Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place, for Jesus often met there with his disciples. So Judas, having procured a band of soldiers and some officers from the chief priests and the Pharisees, went there with lanterns and torches and weapons. And all four of the Gospels talk about this night, and they all talk about this moment where Jesus is betrayed. And for the most part, they're all pretty much in sync with pretty much the exact same details, and maybe just a little flourish here or there that might be different. But John spends a lot more time on this section leading up to the cross than the other three do. And he includes some details that the other three do not. And one of them is that there were soldiers that were with this party. And these aren't temple guards. There would be another word for that. These are actual soldiers, which means these were Roman soldiers, which immediately pops up a whole list of questions that we might have of, why were there Roman soldiers with these Jewish officials and officers from the temple coming here, which means that somebody tonight, the same night, had to go, after Judas went to the high priest or one of his representatives and said, hey, I'm ready to turn over Jesus to you for 30 pieces of silver. They then said, okay, worked out with him how it was going to happen, where they were going to grab him. And then at some point they went to the Roman fortress that was there in Jerusalem and let the Roman officials know, we've got a terrorist, a troublemaker, somebody dangerous, and we're going to go arrest him now, but there could be trouble, and we need you to send some soldiers with us for our protection. Right? Because they know that Jesus is kind of popular, right? Like he's done a few things around here, you know? That there's plenty of people who know that there's sort of a price on his head, and yet people can't stop talking about what happened with Lazarus and all these things. They don't know who's necessarily going to be with him at this point in the night, and what's going to happen if they just show up and try to grab him. They're probably assuming that there's going to be a fight, and I'm sure Judas said, oh yeah, that, you know. Peter carries his little sword that he's so proud of on his belt. That's not much bigger than a dagger, but you know he talks about it all the time and how he's going to fight with it. And you know the others will probably put up a good scrap. And so for whatever reason they felt like they needed soldiers for what's happening. And you notice that John makes the point that they came with lanterns and torches and weapons. And remember, it's a full moon. There is plenty of light in the sky if they just need to be able to get from the outer wall of Jerusalem to this little garden across the valley. You don't need lanterns and torches for all that. You need lanterns and torches if you're going to be hunting bush to bush, looking for people who have run away in the dark. So they're clearly expecting that Jesus is going to make a run for it, and they're going to have to pluck him out of a tree or a bush, and they'll need lanterns and torches to find him. And then they've also brought weapons with them because they're expecting there's going to be resistance. John is just in one quick sentence just laying that all out for us, that this is what they think they're about to walk into, so that what happens next just shows how totally wrong they are and how totally wrong they have misjudged Jesus and his purpose and his mission. Like totally. So verse 4. So then Jesus, knowing all that would happen to him. That's like a really crazy statement right there. Not like knowing that it was going to be bad or having some like, that kind of Star Wars, I have a bad feeling about this. Like it's kind of ambiguous. I don't know what it's going to be, but something bad's about to happen. No, John says, no, Jesus knew it all. He knew exactly what was going to be done to him. And this was his response. He says he came forward and said to them, whom do you seek? He just steps right into it. Right into it. And you can see the mirroring already that's taking place in these next few scenes leading up to the cross, and what John showed us in chapter 12 with the resurrection of Lazarus, where Jesus, John makes sure that we know that Jesus knew that going to help Lazarus would mean his death ultimately, if not right away, soon after that, because that would be that would be crossing the line that there's no coming back from. He knew that. His disciples knew that. And he went anyway. He went anyway because Lazarus was his friend and he loved him. He loved him. And so he went to rescue Lazarus from death, even at the cost of his own life, because he loved him. I mean, that's the gospel right there. And so Jesus, knowing what's going to happen to him, but knowing why it must happen, knowing who those for whom there's no other way, there's no other way for us back to the Father unless he steps forward and does this and accepts this. And so he just, without any hesitation, he steps in to his own torment and torture on our behalf and says, who are you looking for? And they answered, Jesus of Nazareth? And Jesus said to them, I am he, or literally in the Greek, I am. Judas, who betrayed him, was standing with them. And when Jesus said to them, I am he, they drew back and fell to the ground. And I love that John gives us like absolutely zero explanation for what in the world just happened. And, we're free to speculate, were there like angels present surrounding Jesus? And he was just like, when he said, I am, they were just like, on your knees, like this is the king kind of thing. Was there just something about the way he said it that just took them by surprise? Was there some, John does not tell us, which causes me to believe that John himself doesn't know why they fell back like that. But they did, and he recorded it, and he let us know that Jesus said, I am, and these soldiers and men with with weapons and torches, all that, they fell back when he announced himself. So evidently they got up again, and they asked, and so he asked them again, whom do you seek? Like, what's going on, guys? Why are you running away? I'm right here. You got all the torches and weapons and all that. And they said, Jesus of Nazareth. And he said, I told you that I'm he. So if you seek me, let these men go. And we don't know, they don't know, the disciples don't know, like what these guys' orders are. They hear this is the end for all of us. We're outnumbered, we're outgunned. We could maybe try to scramble over this garden wall and on an olive tree, but they've got torches and lanterns and they're going to track us down. And there's a lot of them. There's enough of them to get all of us. What are we going to do? And the heart's pounding and Jesus isn't, he just seems to be giving himself over to them. And that can't be right. What's going on? No, Jesus. This can't be what you've been talking about all night. Right? But Jesus said, I'll give myself up, but let them go. Release whatever claim you have on them. Let them go and take me instead. It's just, this whole story is just so pregnant with little pictures of the gospel over and over and over again, just reinforcing all that is about to happen and why it's happening. I mean, Jesus did all of this so that he could look sin and death in the face and say, take me and let them go. And we're told by John that he said this to fulfill the word that he had spoken of those whom you gave me, I have lost not one. Now, when did Jesus say that? Like in the last chapter, right? He prayed that to the Father. Now, thus far in John's gospel, whenever Jesus has done something that John, wanted to point out to us, this was really important because this fulfilled this word. Where was that word from? From the Torah, right? From the Tanakh, from the what we call sometimes the Old Testament, right? John was always saying, Jesus said this because this is fulfillment of Scripture that was now happening before our eyes when Jesus said this. And John points that out several points in his gospel. There's plenty of times where Jesus is doing that, and John doesn't point it out to us. It's just like Easter eggs there for us to find, all these Old Testament Easter eggs. But now, when Jesus is saying something that's fulfilling a word that he himself, it's not specific directly a quote, but from his own dialogue with the Father, and the Apostle John is treating that now as at the same level as Scripture. See what he's doing? He's already, before we've even finished his book, he's teaching us to understand that everything Jesus said was Scripture. Every prayer he prayed was Scripture and had the same weight and authority and power as anything written by the prophets. Then Simon Peter, having a sword, and sword in my English translation is a generous word for what is described there. It's like a short sword or a big dagger, drew it and struck the high priest's servant and cut off his right ear. And John is the only one that tells us the name of this poor guy. His name was Malchus, which is interesting because it's like, how does John know that was his name? We'll get to that. So Jesus said to Peter, "Put your sword into its sheath. Shall I not drink the cup that the Father has given me?" And John's gospel, like this is all we get of Gethsemane. Like we don't get the Jesus on his knees before the Father, trembling, anxious, and sweating blood, all of that. We don't get that scene. We've had other scenes in this gospel. We've seen Jesus greatly troubled in his spirit as he approached this hour and this moment. But clearly, for the 50th time, I think I've said this, like he knows that you're familiar, you the reader of this book, you've heard this gospel before from somebody else. Maybe orally, you've heard the stories that are floating around. Maybe you've read Mark's account that he got through Peter, whatever. And so like he doesn't even have to tell you, like, what is he talking about? A cup that the Father has given him. Like you've probably heard that part of the story. You remember that part because that's just like, mind blowing. There's Jesus there pleading for some alternate route, alternate path to accomplish the mission, to rescue God's lost image bearers from their own futile rebellion. And yet his prayer ends with, "Not my will, but yours be done." And once he says that, like, that's it. Okay, I'm going to drink it. And now he has this opportunity because Peter just started a fight. Like, okay, we could just fight now, And Jesus is like, no, that's not. No, I've already determined. I've already committed. I've already surrendered to the Father's will. I am drinking this cup, and not you or anybody else is going to be able to stop me because this is the only way. So the band of soldiers and their captain, these are Roman soldiers, and the officers of the Jews arrested Jesus and bound him. Which is just already, like, it just continues to become a bigger, this whole picture of Jesus as he's being treated and passed around is just like this more and more ridiculous image. Because remember, picture all these soldiers, like Roman soldiers with their cool armor and, the officers with their crests and all of that. And they got weapons and shields probably and all of these guys. And there's just Jesus, just like, go ahead, tie my hands, lead me away. Like they've come to like put down a small riot for this one humble, meek Jewish man, and it just looks ridiculous. Like they have to feel, like the soldiers have to feel ridiculous. They called us out. They woke us up at what time at night? We could be either sleeping in the barracks or gambling or drinking or whatever, and instead we got to be here to read this. Who's this Jewish guy that looks like all the other Jewish guys we see all week, at this festival? Like, what is going on here? They bind him, and it says, first they led him to Annas, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was high priest that year. And so John is sort of alluding to some temple politics that when he wrote this, people would probably still be familiar with, that we need a little more explanation about just a little bit, which was how it normally worked is when you assume the office of high priest in the temple, that's like a position for life. Like unless you do something like morally, ritually or whatever to really screw up and get kicked out, like you're in that position for life. Well, Annas did something that irritated the Roman governor over the region at the time, that he's like, well, I don't want to talk to you anymore because as the high priest, he would have been coming and giving reports on things and sort of like as a important like city father, like be in council meetings and things as they were doing things. And anyway, they got into it, some kind of disagreement. And he's like, I'm not talking to you anymore. Tell your temple they need to pick a different priest. Like, you don't get to be high priest anymore. And he's just like, you're a stupid Gentile. You don't get to do that. Like, he's like, well, we're not going to recognize any other high priest. So when we have our meetings, the chair for high priest is going to be empty because it won't have you in it. And so they selected his son-in-law to take his place publicly, and for political functions, Caiaphas was high priest. But as we can see from what's about to happen and how this is unfolding, for all intents and purposes, for the Jewish point of view, who's the real high priest? It's Annas. It's Annas. And that's why, who do they take him to first to decide what to do with him and to check him out? Is Annas, because he's the real high priest. So they take him there. It was Caiaphas, John reminds us, by the way. This is what pops out of the story. Hey, it was Caiaphas. Remember that guy? When they were meeting right after Lazarus was resurrected and they decided for sure they got to put him to death. It was Caiaphas that when they were arguing about that, Caiaphas said, yeah, guys, wouldn't it be better for the whole nation if one person died instead of the whole nation being destroyed? Yeah, Caiaphas said that, but he had no idea what he was saying. He was actually prophesying through the Holy Spirit that Jesus was going to die for the people. So he's like reminding us, it's that Caiaphas that we're talking about. So Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple. Who is this guy? Who is this other disciple who is sometimes called the beloved disciple? Well, this disciple, we're told, since that disciple was known to the high priest, he entered with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest. But Peter stood outside at the door. So the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out and spoke to the servant girl who kept watch at the door and brought Peter in. So this other disciple, which a lot of people, and I myself included, I think this is like the Apostle John. This is him in the story. But a lot of people have struggled with that over the years because we know from the other Gospels, what was the Apostle John's profession? You remember? Because he knew, him and his brother James knew Peter. He was a fisherman. He knew Peter and Andrew too, because they're both fishermen in what region? Up in Galilee, right? The Lake of Galilee, where all the fish are. And so a lot of people thought, why would some young guy from Galilee, fisherman, have such influence and connection that he can just walk into the high priest's courtyard, like the servants recognize him and just let him right on in, that he gets to hang out, and has enough, influence and almost authority that he can go to the servants and say, "Oh, that guy's with me. Let him in. I know he looks kind of scruffy and dangerous, but yeah, he's with me. He's got a sword on his hip." But it's just a knife. He just uses that for cutting chicken. Let him on in. And people thought, that can't be right. There has to be somebody else. It's some unnamed disciple that we just don't know who it is, and blah, 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 blah. But everything else about this unnamed disciple, if it's the same disciple that's always unnamed, who's constantly popping up in the story, seems to point that it's the Apostle John. And so that means that maybe there was more to the Apostle John and his family then we know. Maybe, we know that their father was wealthy and that he owned the fishing business. And so maybe, there was something more to him and his connections. He had some kind of connection to the high priest family. Maybe his mother or one of his older sisters or something. Like, we don't know their tribe. I don't remember if we know the Apostle John's tribe. Like, if they were a Levite, or connected to a Levite by marriage. Had some kind of connection there. We don't know. I mean, we know that Mary and Joseph seem like pretty humble people, and yet Mary's cousin was a priest in the temple, right? John the Baptist's parents. And so I don't think it's super hard to believe that the young Apostle John had some serious connections that he just doesn't want to brag about, but he uses them in the story. So he lets Peter in, and the servant girl at the door says to Peter, "You also are not one of this man's disciples, are you?" So she recognized, and this is the other thing interesting, this other disciple who got Peter in, like the girl recognizes that he's with Jesus. And she's like, "Oh, you're with Jesus too?" And he just said, "I am not." Thank you very much. Now, the servants and officers had made a charcoal fire because it was cold, and they were standing and warming themselves. And Peter also was with them, standing and warming himself. And so he's out there, trying to figure out what to do, probably wondering, what in the world? Why am I even here right now? Like, what do I hope to accomplish? What is John thinking, and what's going to happen here? And they know us. And, remember, what was the thing that Jesus said to him earlier in the night when Peter was boasting? "I'm going to die with you, Jesus." And he's like, "Really? You're going to die with me tonight? You're going to deny me 3 times. And is he even thinking that he just did the first one? Or is he just thinking, "Oh, it's just a little white lie to get in. It's no big deal. I'm going to look for an attempt. I'm going to break Jesus out of here. I still have my little sword. And, when the time is right, I'll cut Jesus' bonds loose and he'll walk on water or something and escape." But now we transition over to what's happening. So this is happening on the outside in the courtyard. Inside the house, this is what's happening. The high priest then questioned Jesus. And look what he questions him about: his disciples and his teaching. He wants to know who are his main ringleaders, right? Because he probably when they came back, they were like, "Okay, you picked up this guy. Judas told us there was 11 other guys with him that are like his main leadership group. Like, where are they?" And I don't know, like he said, like, leave him alone. So we just did because we felt like we needed to obey him, even though we were binding him up. And so they want to know who his disciples are. They want to go so they can send people out and go around these poor guys up. They probably have no idea. They'd be embarrassed to know that 2 of them are in the courtyard right now outside the window. And they want to know, like, what he was teaching. What have you been teaching exactly? And with that, obviously, it's clear. They want his disciples because they want to round up all the ringleaders and put them all away at once. And then number 2, they want him to just, say one of his crazy teachings where he claims to be God, and so that they can accuse him of blasphemy publicly and, with whoever they've got gathered up there at the high priest's house. And then it's an open check case. He's guilty. We can have him killed. So Jesus answered them, "I have spoken openly to the world. I have always taught in synagogues and in the temple where all Jews come together. I have said nothing in secret. Why do you ask me? Ask those who have heard me what I said to them. They know what I said." Which, by the way, this is what Jesus is advocating is what was at the time like normal Jewish judicial procedure. You normally, like if somebody was accused of something, like you would never actually ask them to give a testimony or an account normally. That would be like, if you're ever going to ask somebody, that would be the last person. Because everybody knows nobody's going to testify against themselves. They're only going to say, "I didn't do it." So what's the point? Instead, what you always do is you ask questions of witnesses, and in Jewish courtroom settings, you would actually start with the witnesses that could speak in favor of the accused, so that the people would have first established in their mind the person's character and who they are, who their friends are, their relationships and all that. Then you would bring in the people that are bringing the accusation and listen to their story and decide if what they've said matches the kind of person that the people that spoke in favor of them say that this person is. And that's how it would normally, and usually the accused would never have to give an account. And the decision would be decided by these witnesses. But that's not what they're doing. They're like going the whole opposite route. Like, this is not normal at all. And Jesus is saying, you should ask people that actually heard. That's the normal thing to do. And so when he said these things, one of the officers standing by struck Jesus with his hand, saying, "Is that how you answer the high priest?" Does this remind you of a similar scene somewhere else in the New Testament? Paul in Acts. You guys remember that scene where Paul is dragged before a group, like they got the Roman authority there, but they've also got some of the Jewish authorities, and they're making all these accusations against Paul. And, Paul basically accuses them of being whitewashed tombs or something, that was probably accurate. And one of the guys punches Paul in the face and is like, "You can't talk that way to the high priest." And what was Paul's reaction when he was told that? You remember? He was like, "I'm sorry, my bad. I didn't know he was the high priest. I know you guys are doing a little dance right now. You can't figure out who the high priest is." Little passive-aggressive jab. But you're right, I should respect the office. And I'm sorry for what I said, and I shouldn't have said that to the high priest. And he basically accepts, yeah, you were right to smack me. And I am under your authority because you are the supreme religious authority. You're corrupt, but you're the supreme religious authority, and I submit to the established authorities. How is Jesus going to handle getting smacked in the face? Jesus answered him, "If what I said is wrong, bear witness about the wrong. But if what I said is right, why do you strike me?" Do you notice what he does there? He does not what he doesn't do, and what he continues to not do all the way up to the cross is he does not bow to anybody else's authority. Even when he's talking to the most powerful people in that region, and they're dragged before him and treating him as if he's someone with no power and no authority, he is constantly turning the tables on them and putting himself in the place of the one who is the... Notice what he's putting himself in the place, I'm the religious authority in the room right now, and you need to give account for why you just sinned to me. Absolutely nothing. "Oh, well, you're right. That's the high priest. I should try to speak more respectfully." No. The high priest is not the supreme religious authority of Israel. Yahweh is. And Yahweh's in the room. And they don't know it. And that's part of the horrific, tragic irony of what is transpiring in these scenes is Yahweh is in the room and nobody's realizing it. And so Annas then sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. So now one high priest is giving him to the other high priest. He's not going to talk. He's not going to say anything self-incriminating. Let's see if Caiaphas can figure out something to get out of him. So then we go back to Peter. Where's Peter? We last left Peter warming himself by the fire. Where's Peter now? Warming himself by the fire. Still hasn't come up with a great escape plan, how to get Jesus out of here. So they said to him, so one of the people that were there warming by the fire, right? There were some other people there, right? "You also are not one of his disciples, are you?" And he denied it and said, "I am not." And one of the servants of the high priest, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, asked, "Did I not see you in the garden with him? Weren't you the crazy dude with the sword?" That's the sword, right? And Peter again denied it, and at once the rooster crowed. And so it's just John knows that we probably know this part of the story pretty well. He doesn't talk about Peter using foul language. He doesn't talk about Peter bursting into tears and running away crying. None of that. That's not what's important. What's important for him to show, Jesus knew all that was going to happen this night. The worst of the worst, and he knew not one bit of it took him by surprise, and he willingly stepped into it. He stepped in to have one of his best friends totally betray him socially like this. He stepped into that, and he looked at that guy with love, and he washed that guy's feet just a few hours before this, and laid hands and prayed on him just a few hours before this. So then they led Jesus from the house of Caiaphas to the governor's headquarters. So this is where the Roman governor is. It was early morning, and they themselves did not enter the governor's headquarters, so they would not be defiled, but could eat the Passover. And if you're a very careful reader, you're going to be like, didn't they just eat the Passover? What's going on? Well, there's a day, the Passover, and then there's the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and Passover is like the first day, and then you got 7 days of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And sometimes, for shorthand, they would just call that whole week of feasting and celebration Passover. And so they know that if they go into this guy's house, they've entered a Gentile's home, there's probably yeast in there, there's probably people that have touched dead bodies recently in there, because these guys are Romans, they're killing people all day long. And actually, this is like a weird thing that I read. I'm just going to mention it. There was part of the reason they think that Jews did not want to enter the house of Gentiles, particularly Romans, are that Romans practiced a lot of abortions in their homes. They would initiate abortions, and then they would dispose of the bodies of the aborted babies. They would either bury them in the home or flush them down the toilet, so to speak. And the Jews saw that as just like total, like that this whole house is defiled by that. And so it's not just like, oh, you guys are a different race than us and we're super racist, so we don't want to enter your house. Like they really felt like these people are just a defiled people who practice, like blood is just on their hands all the time, and we don't want any of it rubbing off on us. So if they go into the house, then they have to wait till sunset to ritually bathe and purify themselves, and they want to be able to participate in the feast. It's a holiday, for goodness sakes. And so they're standing outside the governor's mansion and making Pilate come to them. And this, by the way, the fact that they're able to do this suggests that they've already kind of given him a heads up. They probably came to him originally to get permission to get these soldiers that have been traveling with them, because they wouldn't presumptively like wake him up in the middle of the night and say, hey, you should come and talk to us in the street. Like they know they're not going to get away with that, but they've let him know. So this is all staged. He knows they're coming. He knows they're bringing us this, rebel leader. And then, so knowing that, look how he handles it. So Pilate went outside of them, this is verse 29, and said, what accusation do you bring against this man? Again, remember, the way this has been set up, it really heavily implies that they have already talked to Pilate. He knows what's going on. He knows what their beef with Jesus is. He's agreed to let them go and apprehend this rebel leader so that they can have him put to death. That's why he gave them the soldiers in the first place. And now he's asking like, oh, who's this guy? What's going on? So what is Pilate doing? He is messing with them. He's just, for the fun of it, he is messing with them because he doesn't like these Jewish leaders. He doesn't like their people. He doesn't like their stinking country. This is just a job to him. And one of the few fun things he gets to do in his job is he gets to take people that think they're big and powerful and important in their own country, among their own people, and actually show them, no, the big bad Western power is actually the one in charge, and we've got our boot on your throat, and we'll tell you what to say and when to say it and how high to jump. And we can play games like this with you all day long and laugh about it. And you can't do anything about it because we have the military might and you don't. That's exactly. So he's just intentionally, I think, just trying to inflame them just for fun. He's trolling them. So they answered him, if this man were not doing evil, we would not have delivered him over to you. It's kind of like hint, hint, like we've talked about this. Like they're not even going into it because they know he knows the answer. And they're just like, come on, dude. It's, 4 o'clock in the morning. Like, do we have to, can you rib us another time? And Pilate said to them, take him yourself and judge him by your own law then. Like, just totally, because he knows they can't do that. He knows that because they're allowed to have little Jewish courts and carry out little sentences like the 40 strikes minus one and those types of things. But they're not allowed to put people to death. And he knows that they've brought Jesus here because they want him put to death. And only Rome reserves the special, wonderful right, the pleasure of putting people to death. And only Rome. And it's really important, all the Roman provinces, that all the people understand that Rome holds the power of life and death and no one else. And they know that, and he's making them have to come out and say it. He's making them say it. They said, it's not lawful for us to put anyone to death. There, like we said it. Are you happy now? Like we admit, you're the one in charge. We're not. We have to come to you and ask your permission to kill this criminal. So will you just give it? And we're told that this was to fulfill the word that Jesus had spoken to show by what kind of death he was going to die. And what kind of death is he going to die? It's not going to be stoning. It's going to be crucifixion. And what has he been talking about? When the Son of Man is lifted up, when the Son of Man is lifted up, that's when he will draw people to himself. That's when he will be highly exalted. That's when he will take his kingdom, is when he is lifted up. And the only people that can lift him up in this way are the Romans and Pilate, because they hold the keys to that. And that's why this is happening. It's like John is showing, like all these things that are happening, they thought at the time this is all just happening because this guy hates these guys and they're just, he's messing with them and they're angry because of this and they're threatened because of that. And all these things just happen to happen like that. But John wants us to know that Jesus saw every bit of this coming, and so did the prophets. And the writers of the Hebrew Bible, at least in part, saw this coming. And though it looks like the kingdom of darkness is just running wild and continues to run wild over the next few gruesome pages, that God is not out of control in any of this. And that he saw this coming and that Jesus himself stepped into it on our behalf. So Pilate entered his headquarters again and called Jesus. So they brought Jesus in. Apparently Jesus isn't concerned about being defiled for the Passover by this Gentile guy. And he says to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" That's his first question. And, Jesus answered to him, because that could mean a lot of things depending on what his motivation behind the question is. So Jesus prods him. "Do you say this of your own accord? Or did others say it to you about me?" Again, so he just went from religious authority. Now this is the highest political authority in the land. He's there to interrogate Jesus. Jesus is the criminal. He's the judge who decides if Jesus lives or dies. So he started to ask him, making him answer the charges against him. And clearly one of the charges is he thinks he's king of the Jews, so we should kill him. And so he asks him, "Do you think you're king of the Jews? Is that what you think?" And then Jesus instantly does not submit to his authority. He acts like he's the highest political authority in the land. Because in reality, the highest political authority in Israel is Yahweh, and Yahweh is in the room. And so Yahweh asks Pilate, "So why exactly are you asking me this question? What's going on in your heart right now?" Now he's interrogating Pilate, like just instantly turns the tables. Does not even play at being beneath them, being their servant, being their captured criminal. He acts as if he's the one who's the king in the room. And Pilate answered, "Am I a Jew?" In other words, do I look like somebody who cares who the king of the Jews is? Like I'm losing sleep, I'm up at 4 a.m. wondering who the king of the Jews is? He's like, "Your own nation and chief priests have delivered you over to me." And that word in the Greek has overtones. Like you could translate it as, they have betrayed you to me. They have betrayed you into my hand. Your own people and your own leaders did this to you. What do you think about that? And Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting that I might not be delivered over to the Jews. But my kingdom is not from the world." And what does he mean by that? What does that mean, my kingdom is not of the world? He's talking about source. He's talking about origination. And he's saying that I have a kingdom, but it's not based anywhere on this planet geographically. It's based somewhere else. And it's not, and because it's somewhere else, it's not really threatened by anything you guys and your big empire do over here. Can't touch what is mine. And I said, if it was, like if I had a kingdom here, then yeah, I'd have something that I'd need to defend because you might send more Roman legions to come and take it. But my kingdom that I have, your Roman legions can never even see it, let alone touch it. I'm not worried about you guys. You're no threat to me. So he's saying, he's basically telling Pilate, who is trying to decide what to do with Jesus and has the power to have him executed immediately. And Jesus is letting him know, look, dude, don't worry. You're not a threat to me. I'm not threatened by you. Your whole Roman Empire, the biggest, baddest empire on the planet, nothing. You guys can't even touch what I have, so it's okay. I'm not worried about you guys. Like it's crazy. And you can imagine like Pilate, like, who is this guy? Who is this guy? But he seizes on that Jesus said, my kingdom. And so he says, so you are a king then. Like we can at least agree on that you are claiming to be a king. And Jesus said, you say that I'm a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come or arrived into the world. And he's making it really clear that his birth on planet Earth is not his beginning. His birth was his vehicle for him arriving on this planet in his current form, which is just, again, imagine like this Jewish guy, hands are tied, his simple, robe and all of that. And he's just like, yeah. He's like, you say I'm a king? Actually, that's the whole reason I came to this planet, was to be king. That's why I'm here. And he says, and he goes on to say, I've come into this world to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. And if we've been paying attention in John's gospel and these themes of truth and versus deception and blindness versus sight, belief versus unbelief, life versus death, this light and dark theme, right? So when Jesus says, I'm bearing witness to the truth, that like takes us all the way back to John chapter 1, right? Like, let's just quickly just flip back over there. John chapter 1, like bearing witness about truth seems like a direct quotation about something that we saw right in the very beginning when this was all being set up, right? Let's start at verse 9 of John chapter 1. He says, the true light, both light and truth, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world, about to be born. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. And just a few verses up, there was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to bear witness, about the light, that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but came to bear witness about the light. And that's right. And so, who was the light? Jesus. And so the light is shining, revealing a truth that Jesus is telling Pilate, this is actually why I'm here, to be king and to reveal real truth to planet Earth. And what is that real truth? That Yahweh is now visiting the planet, and you guys should be paying attention. And he's like, and the people who are of the truth, the people that are seeking the truth, they're going to hear my voice. They're going to be able to listen. They're going to be able to follow me because they're seeking and following and coming after my light. So Pilate says to him, what is truth? What is truth? And after he said this, he went back outside of the Jews and told them, I find no guilt in him. He doesn't say he thinks Jesus is, playing with a full deck. He doesn't say that he doesn't think Jesus might be, delusions of grandeur or whatever, but he's like, this guy has not done anything. And I'm sure that Pilate at this point is really suspicious now about what's really going on, because he's a political guy, he's a politician. And he knows if the Jews are telling the truth and Jesus is some rebel army raising up criminal, right? Do these religious authorities, the high priest and his family and all that, what do they think about Rome? They hate Rome. So why are they giving me the criminal that wants to destroy Rome and start a revolution and set Israel free from Rome and create a Jewish kingdom? Why are they turning this guy over to me? They wouldn't do that unless they hate this guy more than they hate us. So what has this guy done? Like you can see, like he wants to figure out like what, there's got to be more to this guy. And as he's talking to Jesus, Jesus is way out there, but he's not talking about armed rebellion. In fact, he's saying, Roman Empire is not a threat to me. I don't need any armies to deal with them. They're not a big deal. I'm here. Yeah, I'm a king, but not of this world. And I'm just here to bear witness, to testify to truth. To the truth, which is him. So he goes back out, I have no guilt, but you guys have a custom that I should release one man for you at the Passover. So do you want me to release to you the King of the Jews? And they cried out again, not this man, but Barabbas. Now Barabbas was a robber. That's all John tells us about Barabbas. There's some people, because of some older manuscripts, think that the guy's first name was actually Jesus. He had the same first name as the Lord. And then Barabbas is kind of a really interesting Aramaic name because it means, like in Arabic, it would be Ibn al-Ab. Like it's the son of the father or the father's son. His name was probably literally Jesus, Father's Son. Like, and here's your choice. So here's the real Jesus, the real Yeshua, the real salvation, the real Son, the Son of the Father. And here you have another guy who has the same name, kinda, but looks completely different. This guy's a real king. This guy's a revolutionary. This guy has a kingdom of this world. This guy wants to build a kingdom in this world, for his revolution and down with Rome. This guy, has murdered a lot of people to try to bring his kingdom in. This guy's been healing people and raising the dead to show people what his kingdom is like. Like, couldn't be, like, same name, couldn't look more differently, and it's just put on the same stage for them. The other gospel writers make a bigger deal out of this scene to like really help you to see like there's this crowd, and there's their choice. There's the choice. This is what the world wants. This is what the world sees as a heroic revolutionary leader, and this guy just looks like weakness, failure. Who wants to follow him? And so the world screams out, no, we want that guy. We want Barabbas. That's who we want. Release him to us. We don't want that guy. We don't want weak Jesus. Right? And we know as the reader, like, whoa, they're making a big mistake. They're making a big mistake because that's the real deal, right? But see, John's such a great writer. He's like, I gotcha. You're right. So why are you following the wrong guys, the wrong people all the time? Why are you looking to the wrong leaders? Why are you looking at leaders that don't look anything like Jesus, look the opposite about Jesus than Jesus, but they got the right name over their head, and so you want to follow them. We're every day making that choice of who we're going to follow. And we see this scene, and it's supposed to break our heart because we just constantly see that Jesus is the real king. Jesus is the real high priest. Jesus is the real everything. And yet so often we get caught up with the crowd, we get caught up in the world, and we rush after the fake thing, and think that that's what we really want. And we're actually choosing death. And we're actually choosing, and who knows what happened to this poor guy? Maybe he found the Jesus and is with the Lord now or not. But what he represents, because all John tells us, and he was a robber. Just think about that. Who is Jesus talked about in this gospel and saying he's a robber who comes to kill, steal, and destroy? It's almost, I'm not saying that Barabbas was literally Satan standing there, but he's almost meant to be like the Antichrist type figure standing there. And then we're supposed to just be heartbroken as we see the people rush, just as they will in the last days again, rush to follow the anti-Jesus and reject and neglect and disown the real guy, the real Son of God, the real Messiah, the real King of Kings.